The Zarkith swarm had never known defeat. Their empire stretched across 300 galaxies. Entire species surrendered without a fight. Worlds fell in hours. Civilizations older than stars bent the knee or were turned to dust. They didn't negotiate. They didn't pause. They just consumed. And when their next target was charted, a small spiral arm labeled Sol Arm Deathworld Class 5, they didn't hesitate. Just another system to burn, until they met it. The Warship. No name in the database. No record in ANI. Galactic Archives. It was as if the vessel had been hidden on purpose. But it was human. That much was clear. A single ship. Cold. Silent. Black as grief. Floating between the swarm and Earth's outermost colony. The swarm's first response was laughter, then warning shots, then a full-on barrage. None of it touched the ship. And then it answered, not with words, not with threats, with one move. A single weapon, unleashed once. One moment of light. A third of their fleet simply vanished. No explosion, no debris, just silence. And a message followed, brief and encoded in every language the swarm had ever encountered. We let you come this far because we thought you'd learn. You didn't. This is your lesson. There won't be another. They tried to retreat. The ship didn't pursue. It didn't need to. From that day on, they changed course when they saw the symbol. A red ring, crossed with a single line. Not a warning. Not a flag, a promise. They had never lost a war. Zarkith swarm. An empire so old even stars didn't remember when it started. For thousands of years they had eaten galaxies like insects crawling over sugar. No one had ever stopped them, not even once. They didn't come to talk. They didn't come to ask. They came like a black tide, ships shaped like knives, engines that screamed like dying stars, and minds connected in one giant hive. There were no leaders, no names, just the swarm. They attacked from all sides. They didn't wait. Civilizations begged. Ancient species tried to hide. Some prayed to forgotten gods. Others tried to fight. But they all ended the same way. Burned planets, empty cities, DNA melted into fuel, voices gone. 300 galaxies. Not planets, not systems. Galaxies. Gone. The Zarkith didn't care who you were, rich, advanced, peaceful, spiritual, it didn't matter. If you were in their path, you vanished. And then one day they found a new place, a small spiral arm, far from the main galactic roads, barely noticeable. Quiet. On their charts it was marked simply, Sol Arm. Deathworld class. It meant dangerous conditions, hard radiation, harsh climate, unstable species. But to the swarm, that was a joke. They had destroyed Deathworld Class 7 systems before breakfast, so they didn't slow down. They didn't think twice. They just entered. The outermost colony was an old human base, name Andar's Reach, silent, dead. No ships in orbit, no signals. Only a few satellites spinning quietly, blinking lights into empty space. It looked abandoned, like a house left during a storm. The swarm sent scouts, dozens of them. They scanned the system. No defense grid, no fleet, just one moon with weak surface activity. It looked like humans had already killed themselves off. A common story. They laughed. And then the signal came. Not a scream, not a warning, just a flicker. A single energy spike that didn't match any known tech. It was faint like a heartbeat in deep water. At first they thought it was an old machine powering up, but then it appeared. The Warship. No one saw it arrive. No FTL signature, no portal. It was just there, floating in space like a ghost. Black, silent still. It didn't look impressive, no glowing engines, no bright cannons. Just a dark shape, long and lean, hiding behind the shine of the nearby sun. One of the scout minds said, primitive. Another said, dead vessel, scrap. They approached it, circling like hungry sharks. Hundreds of them. No reaction. The ship didn't move, didn't speak. So the swarm fired. Not a warning shot, a direct hit. Plasma torpedoes, piercing rounds, ion storms, all of it, and nothing happened. The attacks passed through the space where the ship floated like it wasn't. Even there, no explosion, no damage, not even a flicker. And that's when something in the hive mind shifted. A tiny ripple. Doubt. Then came the light. It wasn't an explosion. It wasn't a laser. It was cleaner, like a moment pulled from time itself. One bright flash. No sound, no wave. Just a white line that stretched out for a breath and then gone. 314 swarm vessels disappeared. No debris, no flame, no drifting pieces. They were just erased, as if someone had reached into reality and pressed delete. Silence. The hive screamed. Millions of connected minds froze, confused, blind, shaken, and then they received the message, not just in one language, in all of them. Every tongue they had absorbed, every signal they understood, every sound they'd ever crushed, it played inside their minds like a knife. We let you come this far because we thought you'd learn. You didn't. This is your lesson. There won't be another. The warship didn't move after that. Didn't chase, but it didn't need to. The swarm had never known fear. Not until that moment. The hive didn't know what to do. For the first time in thousands of years, it hesitated. They tried to scan the ship again. It wasn't there. Technically, by all data, they were looking at empty space. But their eyes told a different story. Their instincts screamed the truth. It was there. Watching alive. One of the secondary minds, the kind used to process absorbed data, whispered something unusual into the hive net. It was from a memory, buried deep in the DNA of a species they had wiped out long ago. A word. Human. The ship was human. But that made no sense. Humans were extinct. Their last known coordinates were in a collapsed system. Their signal had been silent for hundreds of years. Another mind, one with military memory, dug into forbidden data. Archive fragments, battlefield echoes, old AI ghosts, and it found something chilling. The red line, a legend, a symbol once seen on the ruins of a Valorian dreadnought after it vanished into a wormhole during a fight with humans. The only thing left was the symbol, burned into the hull, a red ring with a line through it, not a flag. Not a warning, a promise. The hive mind trembled, not because of data, not because of the weapon, because the ship didn't come to talk, didn't ask for peace, didn't shout about revenge, it just acted. Once. Silently. And that was enough. The swarm turned its attention back to the colony. Maybe they could strike it quickly, take the surface, force the ship to follow. But as they looked again, the colony was empty. The humans were gone. Not dead. Just gone. As if they had never been there. The satellites blinked again. This time, they showed the symbol. The ring. And from that moment, the hive changed. They backed away. Slowly. Carefully. Like predators turning from a bigger shadow. The warship didn't move. But the hive knew something now. A truth they had never imagined. They were not alone in their power. They were not the final voice in the universe. And worse, there were things out there that didn't need armies. Didn't need fleets, just one. One ship, one human, and a line that should never be crossed. The swarm had crossed it. And now, the galaxy would remember what came next. Not a war, not a campaign, just a lesson, taught once, to last forever. Deep inside the silent warship, surrounded by cold metal and blinking lights, a man sat alone. His name was Commander Thane Mirov. He had once been part of a fleet, a brotherhood, a home. But now, it was just him. One man inside a machine designed not to protect, not to patrol, but to wait, to watch, to be the last line. 7 years had passed since he had heard a human voice. 7 long, quiet years floating at the edge of a forgotten system. Earth hadn't sent him orders. No signal came from the colonies. Humanity had gone dark. But Thane hadn't. He stayed. Outside, the warship looked like a shadow carved into space. Not shiny, not glorious, just black. A quiet threat. Its surface had no windows, no lights. It didn't need to look beautiful. It needed to be final. Inside, the air was heavy. Not just because of silence, but because of what this ship carried. It wasn't just weapons, it carried memories. The ship was called Silent Reprisal Unit 09, but no one called it that anymore. To the old commanders, it was simply the Reprisal, one of only 9 ships built during Earth's last war. Ships so powerful even humans were afraid to use them. They weren't made to win battles. They were made to end them. With one strike, one message. One clear answer to anyone foolish enough to test humanity. But when the war came, the real war, Earth didn't win. They disappeared. They knew they couldn't stop the flood. So instead of fighting, they vanished. Went into hiding. Spread across galaxies. Erased themselves from star maps. Let the universe forget them. And they left behind a few things. Like this warship. Like Thane. He didn't know if Earth was alive or dead. No one told him. His last order was simple. Guard the line. That was it. So he did. Day after day, he sat in silence, monitoring signals, watching the stars, waiting, hoping the enemy would never come, praying they'd turn away. And when the Zarketh swarm arrived, loud, massive, arrogant, Thane didn't panic. He didn't run. He just watched. He'd seen their type before. Empires that believed they were gods, machines that thought numbers meant victory, creatures who had never tasted real fear. Until they tasted him. Thane could have spoken, could have, sent a warning. But he didn't. He knew better. The ship's AI, an ancient system called Warden, asked him once, "Commander, do you wish to initiate contact?" He simply shook his head. No, let them fire first. And they did. They fired everything. And when the storm passed through him like wind through a ghost, Thane spoke 2 words. Return light. The weapon didn't make a sound. It didn't flash or shake. It just happened. A ripple in space. One breath. And 1/3 of the enemy fleet was gone. Not destroyed. Erased. As if they never existed. It wasn't power. It was precision. A kind of mercy so sharp, it looked like cruelty. And after that, Thane sent the message. Not from anger, not from ego, just truth. We let you come this far because we thought you'd learn. You didn't. This is your lesson. There won't be another. He didn't mean it as a threat. It wasn't a promise of war. It was a simple fact. And now, inside his ship, Thane sat still again, watching, listening. The stars returned to their usual silence. No more weapons. No more movement. The swarm had stopped. But Thane didn't relax. He knew this wasn't the end. Not yet. He looked at the wall in front of him. It wasn't a screen. It was a memory core. An old one. Inside it were stored the final moments of 100 human ships. Ships that never made it. Their last thoughts. Their last cries. Their last stand. He'd listened to all of them. Every voice, every scream, every whisper. That was why he stayed. Because someone had to. The ship wasn't just metal. It had soul. Fragments of old captains stored inside. Voices that sometimes whispered to him when he was alone. Not ghosts. Just echoes. They reminded him of what was lost. Of what could never be allowed to happen again. There were days when Thane doubted. when he wondered if he was the last human alive, if Earth had truly fallen, if all this waiting was useless. But then he'd remember a message left by his daughter before she was evacuated. "Daddy, promise me, if the monsters come, you won't let them through." He had promised, and he hadn't broken it. The swarm was scared now. He could feel it in the way their ships pulled back. Not fast, just uncertain. Like wolves realizing the sheep had teeth. They were scanning the warship over and over, trying to understand what it was. But they would never find anything, because this ship wasn't in any database. Its design was erased from Earth's records. It was meant to be forgotten, hidden. Even the AI, Warden, had no full knowledge of its weapons. They were locked in deep layers. Only Thane's heartbeat could unlock them, his DNA, his voice, and even he didn't know what all of them did. He only used the first one, that was enough. Outside, the stars blinked like distant eyes. The colony of Andar's Reach was still empty. Long ago, the people there had left quietly before the swarm came. They knew what was coming. That was the plan. Let the enemy see an empty house. Let them think no one was home. Then, if they crossed the line, I respond, not with a fight, with a message. And now the message had been delivered. Back in the ship, Thane stood up. His knees cracked, his bones ached. He wasn't young anymore, but his eyes were sharp, cold. He walked through the ship's inner corridors, past weapon bays that hadn't opened in years, past cryopods holding memories, not people, past walls that shimmered with old blood-red light. He entered the armory, not to take weapons, just to look. The symbol was there, painted on the far wall, faded, simple, a red ring with one line crossing it. It wasn't a military logo. It wasn't a fleet badge. It was a decision, drawn by the first commander of Reprisal 01 before she died in a lost war. She had said, "This is not a threat, this is a promise, this is where we stop running." Thane had copied it, painted it on his own ship, on his own heart. Now the swarm had seen it too, and it was working. Sensors showed their ships turning, rerouting. They weren't calling for backup. They were leaving. Slowly. Carefully. They didn't understand what the ship was, or who Thane was, but they understood this. Whatever force had erased their ships wasn't bluffing, and they would never see it coming again. Thane returned to the command deck, sat back down, breathed deep. He knew this wasn't over. The galaxy was wide. Other empires would rise, other monsters would come, but not here. Not now. They had seen the line, and they had stepped back. Somewhere, maybe Earth still lived. Maybe colonies were rebuilding in hidden corners. Maybe his daughter was out there, grown up, strong. Maybe one day, he'd hear a human voice again. But even if he didn't, it didn't matter, because this place, this edge of space, was safe. For now, because he was still here, still watching, still waiting. And if anyone else came to test the silence, they would find the warship, the one with no, named the one with no warning, only a message, only a promise, only one man who said no. The Zarkith swarm did not understand fear, not truly, not like humans did. For them, fear had always been a tool, something they used to make others bend, a biological weakness, a signal to crush harder. But what they felt now wasn't that kind of fear. It was something deeper, colder. They had touched something they couldn't understand, something that didn't match their data, something that didn't respond the way everything else always had. They had met a silence that did not run, and now the hive was divided. Inside the swarm's neural network, where trillions of thoughts moved like currents in a storm, something rare was happening. Disagreement. The central mind, a massive superconscious core known as the Pulse, struggled to explain what had just happened. The warship they had encountered should not have existed. Its signature didn't match any known race. Its energy output was impossible. It broke all their rules. They had been certain that humans were extinct. They had been sure of it. But now, they weren't. The pulse summoned its oldest memories. The time when the swarm had first encountered humans was long ago, before the Great Consumption. Back then, humans were small, chaotic, emotional, not worth noticing, and yet the records had always carried a warning: unpredictable, violent under pressure, capable of surviving impossible odds, avoid prolonged conflict. That warning had always been ignored, because the swarm believed strength came from numbers, from speed, from control. But humans, they had something else. Something that couldn't be counted. And now, a single warship had made their entire galaxy-sized empire hesitate. The swarm debated internally. Should they return in force? Should they send a scout fleet? Should they try to communicate? That last one was strange. The swarm never talked, but something in their shared mind whispered, "This enemy does not behave like others. This is not a world you can consume. This is not prey." One voice in the hive, a young analytical unit named Thir 7, dared to say something no Zarketh had said in 1,000 years. "We must understand them." At first, the other minds tried to crush that thought, but the memory of the vanished fleet, the silent flash, the missing data, the message, was still fresh. They didn't erase Thir 7. Instead, they listened. And they sent one scout. Not a weapon. Not a warship. A probe. Small. Quiet. Disguised like space dust. It drifted toward the edge of Sol Arm, carrying only one thing. A question. Not spoken. Not written. Encoded in quantum particles, laced in patterns only advanced minds could understand. "What? Are you?" The probe never reached the warship, because the moment it entered the system it stopped, not by force, but by command. In space, no sound can be heard, but inside the probe's processors, a voice whispered, low, deep, human, "You already know." And then, the probe turned around on its own and returned to the swarm. They hadn't expected this. They scanned the probe. No damage, no hacking, just changed. The code it carried had been rewritten, not overwritten, rewritten, as if by a hand that knew the inside of the swarm better than they did. Inside the new code there were memories, images, ancient human data, not just war, moments, a child reaching for their parent, a soldier refusing to abandon a friend, a planet singing at sunrise, captain, old and tired, choosing to stay behind so others could escape. These weren't threats. They weren't weapons. They were stories. The swarm didn't understand at first. What kind of enemy sends emotions as a warning? But Thir 7 understood. He said something that shocked the hive. "They're not trying to scare us. They're trying to teach us." The Pulse considered this. It was madness. No species in the galaxy had ever responded this way. The reprisal hadn't chased them. It hadn't hunted them. It had shown power, then stepped back. It had drawn a line, not of conquest but of principle, and that was more dangerous than any weapon, because it meant the humans were not just defending a world. They were defending an idea, and ideas cannot be consumed. Inside, the warship Commander Thane Mirov sat quietly staring at the stars. The AI warden spoke softly. "They sent a probe." He nodded. "I know. You answered it." "I did." "Why?" Thane took a deep breath. "Because they're not ready for another strike. Not yet. They still have time to choose." Warden paused. "You still believe they can change?" Thane didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I believe the universe needs balance. Right now it has none. But it's not because of monsters. It's because no one ever stood still long enough to say, enough." Warden hummed. "So you became the one who stays still?" Thane smiled. "Someone had to." Outside, a single Zarketh vessel remained, a long-range observer, not a threat. It floated near the edge of detection range. Watching. Thane allowed it. He wanted them to watch. He wanted them to remember what they saw here. The reprisal wasn't a god. It wasn't invincible. It was just a choice made real. A decision with armor, and decisions can be made again. The swarm began changing. Slowly. Not from kindness, but from awareness. They updated their star charts. They marked the system restricted. They changed their protocols. New hives were taught about the red line, about the ship that didn't move but made the stars shake, and they gave it a name, not in their language, in the humans. They called it the Line Keeper, not because of what it did, but because of what it didn't do. It didn't chase, didn't destroy more than needed. It simply stood where it had to, unmoving. And in its silence, the swarm heard something they hadn't heard in 1,000 years, a reason to stop, a reason to look inward, to ask questions they had forgotten how to ask. Thur 7, now an honored voice in the hive, said, "This is not defeat, this is a gift." And for the first time the swarm paused, not from fear but from thought. They turned their fleets, they spread out, not to destroy but to observe, to learn. And deep in the dark, watching from his lonely post, Thane Mirov finally closed his eyes. The sensors were quiet, the stars were calm, and in the silence he whispered to himself, "One day someone will come who understands, and when they do, I can rest. But not today." Today, he stayed, alone. A man, a ship, a promise, waiting. Because, if the darkness came again, he would still be there. To say it, just once more. No. The reprisal had not moved in months. It floated like a grave in space, silent, still, cold. No messages were sent, no weapons were charged. But in every system map of the Zarketh swarm, that section of space now glowed red, restricted, dangerous, do not approach. They had learned. At least for now. Commander Thane Mirov still sat at his station, eyes focused on the black void beyond. His body was older now. His beard had grown white in places. The ship's recycled air had a sterile smell, and every corridor echoed like an empty tomb. But his mind was sharp. His purpose was unshaken. He had drawn the line. He was still guarding it. But something had changed. For the first time in years, the silence around the reprisal wasn't absolute. Small signals, faint whispers of energy, drifted across space, not swarm signals, something else. Human. One day, Warden, the AI blinked softly to life. "Commander," it said, "we've received a pulse. Encrypted. Old Earth code. 5 minutes ago." Thane didn't move, didn't react. His voice came after a long pause. "Real, or simulated?" "Real," Warden confirmed. "It's a call sign. Encrypted signature belongs to Fleet Echo Black." Thane closed his eyes. Echo Black. That wasn't a colony. That wasn't a civilian broadcast. That was military, a fleet designation that hadn't been used in almost 20 years. One of the fleets that vanished when Earth disappeared. Thought destroyed. No record, no survivors. But the signal said otherwise. Warden continued. "They are asking if the linekeeper is still active." Thane almost laughed. It was dry, tired, but real. "They called me that? Linekeeper? Among the Zarketh, yes. Among humans. No one has called you anything. Until now." Thane stood slowly. "Send this reply. Still watching. Still holding. Are you real?" The reply came within seconds. 3 words. "We're coming home." That night, for the first time in 7 years, Thane did not sleep. He walked the ship's corridors, like a ghost retracing old steps. His hand touched the cold walls, the old metal, the paint where the red ring and line symbol still remained. Memories crashed through him. He remembered the day he first boarded this ship, the day Earth gave its final order. He remembered the faces of the crew who left, some in escape pods, others in coffins. He remembered his daughter's voice in the final message. "Daddy, one day someone will come. Don't be alone forever." Maybe that day had come. 1 week later, sensors lit up again. Not Zarketh, not Swarm. A ship. Human signature, scarred, old, power readings unstable, but alive. It dropped out of warp, near the system edge, limping, burned. Across the hull were marks of dozens of battles. Some weapons were missing. The left wing was barely holding on, but it was home-built, and it carried humans. Thane watched silently as the ship drifted closer. Warden scanned it. "It is the Vera Kane," the AI confirmed. "Last seen in the Antares sector, presumed destroyed." Thane whispered, "How many on board?" 11. Not a lot, but more than 0. The ship opened a channel, static. Then a voice, dry, raspy, surprised. "This is Captain Roya Kane of the Vera Kane to the reprisal. Is this real? Are we seeing a ghost?" Thane answered, slowly, softly. "This is Commander Mirov. I am not a ghost." Silence. Then, "My God. We thought Earth was gone. We thought you were gone." Thane smiled. "I thought the same of you." They spoke for hours. Captain Roya told him everything. After Earth disappeared, some ships scattered. Some colonies went underground. A few fleets went rogue, fighting their own wars, building silent resistances across the stars. They had no map, no orders, just instinct. Most were lost, but a few survived, like the Vera Kane, and they were not alone. There were others, hidden stations, refugee colonies, engineers living in asteroid belts, small groups guarding ancient data caches. Humans hadn't died. They had hidden and waited until the signal from Thane's weapon strike reached them. They had heard the story. A silent ship, a swarm fleet vanishing without a trace, a red symbol drawn across space like a warning. Hope had returned. Some called it a myth. Others called it a trap, but the bold ones followed it. And now the first had arrived. Roya asked permission to board. Thane hesitated, not out of fear, but emotion. He hadn't seen another human in so long. He wasn't sure how to act. He said, "Yes, the docking was slow. Careful." And then the door opened. Captain Roya stepped through. She was tall, lean, wrapped in a tattered black jacket. Her face was tired, her hair silvered, and her eyes sharp with fire. They didn't hug. They didn't cry. They just stood in silence, 2 soldiers, 2 survivors, 2 lines that refused to break. Roya finally said, "You kept the fire burning." Thane replied, "Someone had to." She looked around. "You know they're scared of you, right? The swarm?" Thane nodded. "Good. Let them be." She smiled. "We're building again, quietly, secretly, but we're ready for more. And we need leaders, old ones, steady ones." Thane raised an eyebrow. "I'm not young, not fast." Roya shrugged. "Doesn't matter. You're the symbol now." She placed a small metal badge on the console. A red ring, crossed by a line. "We call it the Linekeeper's Mark." He stared at it, not as a soldier, but as a father, as a human. It meant he wasn't alone anymore. The next weeks changed everything. More signals came. More old fleets answered the call. The myth had worked. 1 act of power, 1 stand. It had shaken the galaxy. Humanity, once scattered and broken, was reconnecting. They didn't rise with war cries. They rose with silence, with precision, with stories passed in whispers. Not a rebellion, a return. Across space, colonies repainted old flags. Kids in refugee camps drew the red symbol on walls. Engineers rebuilt code fragments into ships. Drones carried messages from star to star, always ending with one phrase. We let you come this far because we thought you'd learn. You didn't. This is your lesson. There won't be another. The line was back. And this time, it wasn't just one man on one ship. It was 100 voices, 1,000 signals, a quiet, unshakable force. The swarm watched. They did not move. They did not test again. Because now they knew. The humans had not vanished. They had waited, and the line-keeper had reminded them why that mattered. Inside the reprisal, Thane looked out the viewport. Ships were arriving. Not warships, just scouts, traders, diplomats, old captains. One by one, they drifted into orbit, waiting silently. No one asked for leadership. They just waited for permission to begin again. Warden's voice came softly. Commander, the line is growing. Thane nodded. Let it. And you? What will you do now? He looked at the badge, held it in his hand. I'll do what I've always done. Pause. Stay. He turned to Roya, who stood nearby. But this time, I won't stay alone. And outside, the stars were no longer silent. They were watching, they were listening, they were remembering, because someone had finally drawn the line and it held. The red line had held. The reprisal still floated quietly in orbit, its black armor like midnight carved from steel. Around it, other ships had arrived. Some old, some new, some barely holding together. But all carried one thing in common, a single symbol painted across their hulls, a red ring crossed by a single line. No longer just a warning. It had become a flag, not of empire, not of conquest, but of survival and of unity. Thane Miroff, the linekeeper, stood at the reprisal's main viewport, watching the stars flicker like breathing lights. His body had aged. His bones hurt more than before, but his eyes still burned with the same fire that had made him stay behind all those years ago. The AI warden spoke softly beside him. Commander, we have confirmation. Fleet Vanguard. Theta has arrived from the quarry belt. 8 ships, all human. Thane exhaled slowly. Any contact with Zarketh in that region? None. They avoid our patrols now. They've learned to redirect. He gave a faint smile. Good. Let them keep learning. Warden paused. There's something else. What is it? A signal, buried deep. Origin unknown, but old. Very old. Human code, but distorted. Thane frowned. Distorted how? It's trying to sound like us, but it's off, like an echo, a ghost. A strange silence fell in the command center, one that didn't feel empty, just watchful. Thane nodded. Play it, the audio began. A voice crackling through static came alive, familiar but broken, tired, haunting. This is Earth Command, final transmission to any vessels still loyal. Hold the line, hold the... Then silence again. Then a sound like breathing. And one last whisper. They're coming. Not Zarketh. Something worse. The transmission ended. For a few long seconds, neither Thane nor Warden said anything. Then Warden broke the silence. That signal is old, fragmented, origin point unknown. Could be a relic. But Thane shook his head. No, that wasn't old. That was recent. Someone sent it now. Someone wanted us to hear it. He turned away from the viewport. What do you mean, something worse? He sat down. The chair creaked beneath his weight. The Zarketh were never thinkers, never builders. They consumed, they rushed. But this message feels like fear, not from prey, but from survivors. He stood again, slowly. Contact Roya Kane. Warden responded. Already on her way up. The door opened moments later, and Captain Roya Kane stepped in, her black jacket dusted with engine grease and her eyes focused like a woman who had been running her whole life, but had finally found a reason to stop. Thane briefed her on the signal. When it ended, she said only one word. Run? Thane shook his head. No, we don't run, we prepare. Roya frowned. You think it's true? That there's something bigger than the swarm out there? Thane nodded. I do. And I think Earth knew. I think that's why they vanished. They weren't just running. They were hiding something. Roya looked uneasy. Then we need to find Earth. Thane looked at her, long and heavy. Or what's left of it. The words stung. But they had to be said. The red line had held, for now. But a new storm was gathering, storm even the swarm feared. Across space, other signals began appearing. Strange. Unnatural. Dead systems flickered to life. Beacons from ancient stations blinked once, then died. Ships sent out to explore never returned. It was subtle at first, a whisper, a shadow, but it grew. The swarm began evacuating worlds. Systems they had ruled for centuries were suddenly abandoned. No battles. No noise, just silence. That's what frightened Thane the most, because the Zarketh never ran silently. If they were running now, something had changed. The human fleet, the Linekeeper's fleet, was small. 100 ships at most, scattered, underarmed, barely connected, but they had something stronger than numbers. They had will. Thane called a council. The captains of every ship docked near the reprisal gathered in the central hall, most for the first time. Some were old fleet officers. Some were rebels. Some were pirates turned protectors. Some didn't speak much at all. But when Thane stepped forward, they all listened. He looked at them, not like a general, but like a man speaking from a wound too deep to hide. You all know me, he began. You know why I stayed, and you know what that line means. He pointed to the symbol burned into the floor. Red ring, single slash. That line wasn't just for the swarm. It was for us. To remember what we were, what we could be. He paused. But something's coming. Something even the monsters are afraid of, and I won't lie to you, we don't know what it is. But we will meet it. And when we do, he looked at each face. We won't meet it crawling, or hiding, or begging. He raised his voice. Not loud, but clear. Like stone-breaking silence. We'll meet it standing. As the line. One by one, the captains nodded. Some raised their fists. Others simply placed a hand over their chest. They didn't cheer. This wasn't that kind of war. This was a vow. Over the next few weeks, something incredible happened. The fleet began transforming. Ships were repaired. Old designs improved. Weapons were recalibrated. A station was built around the reprisal. Modular, floating like a shield. They called it the Bastion. It wasn't a fortress. It was a memory of what Earth once stood for and what humanity could become again. But then, the sky changed. One night, Warden sounded the alarm, not loud, just urgent. Commander, it whispered, something is coming. Thane reached the bridge. Roya was already there. A signal blinked on the screen. A wormhole, forming in real time. Unknown. Origin. Direction. Sol arm. Inside it. A shadow. Not swarm. Not human. Something else. Sensors couldn't scan it. Signals bounced off. It didn't slow. Didn't announce. It just approached. Thane stood still, watching it come. He whispered, "So it begins." The ship dropped out of the wormhole. It wasn't big, but it wasn't normal either. Its surface shimmered like liquid. No engines, no windows, no doors, just presence. Roya stared. "It's looking at us," Warden agreed. "Not passively, actively, I feel observed." The ship hovered, unmoving. Then, without warning, every screen on the reprisal lit up. A single phrase appeared, written in hundreds of languages. Human, alien, dead dialects, even Zarketh script. The line has been drawn, but not for us. Thane clenched his fists. "What do you want?" The message shifted. "To test the one who dares to keep the balance," Roya hissed. They mean you. Then a voice echoed. Not in the ship, in their minds. Show us why you matter. And then the world went white. Thane woke in silence, not on the reprisal, on a memory. Earth, his daughter's room, her toys. Her small voice laughing in the hallway. It wasn't real, but it felt real. The test had begun. The voice returned. Will you trade memory for peace? He shook his head. No. Peace without truth is just surrender. The scene shifted. Now, he stood in battle, his worst defeat. Friends dying, blood on his hands. Will you forget failure for strength? No, he said. My failures made me choose this path. Again, the scene changed, a vision of the future. Earth restored, humanity thriving. This, if you give us the line, Thane smiled. It was not a happy smile, but one of iron. I am the line. Silence. And then, light. He awoke back on the reprisal, sweating, shaking, but whole. The alien ship was gone. Warden said softly, You passed. Thane stood. Roya helped him. Outside, the stars burned brighter than before. The fleet was still there, still holding, still choosing. And far away across the galaxy, a ripple had begun. The universe had seen the line, and it had blinked. Because sometimes the greatest weapon is not power. It's refusal. The refusal to bend, to forget, to fall. One ship had said no. One man had drawn the line, and the galaxy would never be the same. Because now, every system carried the story. Every child knew the symbol. Every tyrant remembered the silence. And somewhere, deep in a dark corner of space where the next storm waited to rise, a message had already been etched into the stars. We let you come this far because we thought you'd learn. You didn't. This is your lesson. There won't be another.